Hi, good morning. It's Friday morning here. We're just ending the first week of Israel's new existential war for its survival. It's been a hard week. One of the stronger messages that we heard this week came from Benny Gantz, former defense minister, who just joined Netanyahu's government and as they formed a national emergency government for the purpose of successfully prosecuting this war to victory. And in his statement, Gantz said, this isn't a political partnership. It's a partnership of fate. That beneath our political divisions, and there's so many, and they've been open and bleeding this entire year, where we've seen the left out on the street protesting and demonizing so many aspects of the Jewish state, and the right then angrily responding to that. What he was saying was that even with all of that, we've reached the foundation of our common existence as Jews, and that is that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. We share a common fate. And therefore, we have to work together in times of national emergency in order to protect our existence so that we can reach a point of safety where we can go back to arguing with one another and castigating one another. And I was thinking about his statement a lot this week, and one of the things that recalled it to mind was this morning when I read this tweet by a father of two children who are students at universities in New York and in New Jersey. Over the past several days, we've seen very violent, very incendiary pro-Hamas protests going off in Harvard and Columbia, University of Wisconsin and Madison, and so many other colleges and universities all around America. America has had all of these pro-Hamas protests all over in all of its major cities and in some of its minor ones. In London, you've had a 300% increase in anti-Semitic attacks against the Jews of England. You have Jewish schools closing in New York. You have Jewish schools closing in London to protect the students because Hamas made a call for Muslims around the world to slaughter the Jews. And so the communities are afraid, just as in Israel, our children are just going back to school, but remotely on Sunday and not going back to school. So too, there's a fear in Jewish communities throughout the world that Jews are going to be under assault. They've been under assault as well in Paris. In Paris yesterday, despite the fact that the French government has prohibited pro-Hamas demonstrations, they had a massive one by the Arc de Triomphe in Paris with thousands of participants. So with all of this going on, I saw this tweet that this father had put out. And he wrote, my daughter is terrified, with terrified in all capital letters, coming home from college. Cars are circling her dormitory, blasting Arabic music, calling for death to Zionists. Same on my son's college campus. This is America, with America in all caps. And somebody responded to this father, and they, people asked, where do your kids go to school? And he said that his daughter was at a state university in New York. He didn't say which campus, and that his son goes to school in New Jersey. And so somebody responded to his statement and said, sigh, time to make Aliyah. And the father responded, to a nation where Jews are being slaughtered, I love Israel, but they cannot protect their children from these monsters either. I think that the father's statement, his response to the question about whether it was time to move to Israel, really gets us to a couple of points that I think it's important to make now. As we see more and more and learn more and more about the gruesome, brutal, barbaric, there aren't words to describe, there just aren't words to describe the nature of what the Palestinians did to the Jews in the border communities with Gaza. There are words, the descriptions of the corpses, the descriptions of the mutilation, of the torture, and of course the boasting about it, the reveling in it that we see in Palestinian social media posts, not only from Gaza, but also from Judea and Samaria. They speak to the nature of that society, that it's sadistic, that it's geared entirely, totally mobilized towards the brutal slaughter of Jews, answering the call of jihad. And even the IDF Chief of General Staff, Herzi Halevi, said in a statement yesterday, his first sort of organized remark since Saturday, that the IDF had failed us, and that he promised that they wouldn't do it again and that we're going to win. But it's true. They were caught unawares. They believed Hamas's deception that it had moderated and the only bad guy in Gaza was Islamic Jihad, just as they believed for the past 30 years, the PLO's deception that it's the moderate and that Hamas is the bad guy. I wrote a column about it that'll be going up on JNS today. They bought into it, and over 1,300 Israelis paid for that failure with their lives, and in a terrible way. And we have, over 100 hostages now being held captive by these monsters in Gaza. So obviously the father's concern for his daughter and his unwillingness to send, to make Aliyah, to move to Israel, is clearly rational, right? We have to win this war, otherwise that's what would happen. I mean, if we hadn't won the War of Independence in 1948, what happened in southern Israel on Saturday would have happened to all 650,000 of the Jews in pre-state Israel in 1948. So it's a war of annihilation that the Muslims are waging against us, and it's a war of national salvation that the Jews have been waging all along. We like to pretend, we like to hide, we like to pretend that it's about something else, or that their goals are more limited, and it's our willingness to believe these deceptive ideas is what has prevented us from defeating our enemies for the past several decades, because we've bought into this lie that the conflict isn't an existential conflict, it's a political conflict, and political conflicts can't be solved by military operations. They can only be solved through Israeli concessions to the likes of Hamas and the PLO and all the rest of them, Hezbollah. And I'd like to respond to that father, and really to all of the Jews in Israel and abroad who are wondering about safety and whether it makes sense to leave Israel, or why would anybody want to come to Israel at this time or ever, given what just happened in the South and 150 years of Muslim terrorism against the Jews in the land of Israel. And before I give the actual answer, I just want to note, at Mount Herzl Military Cemetery, there are tombs of unnamed soldiers who were Holocaust survivors, and they came to Israel after the Holocaust. Many of them, essentially, they were in displaced persons camps in places like Cyprus because of the British prohibition on Jewish immigration to the land of Israel in the pre-state days. And after Israel declared independence and opened its gates up to all Jews who want to make Aliyah, ships of immigrants just came one after the other to the port of Haifa and Jaffa, and brought these Holocaust survivors to the infant state, which was already being invaded. During their internment at these displaced persons camps in Cyprus and in Europe, they were trained for war by representatives of the Palmach, of the Haganah, the Etzel, the Lefi, in the camps. But there were no weapons, so they were actually trained in many cases with broomsticks. Many of them were the sole survivors of their families, and they went directly from the port to the battlefield, were given rifles and told to fight. Some of them were killed in battles like the Battle of Latrun, just a day or two after they arrived on the shores of Haifa or Jaffa. And nobody knew their names. And there they are in this collective grave on Mount Herzl. And why did they come? They could have stayed in Europe after the war. They could have stayed in France or Germany or wherever. They didn't have to come. What drove them to come to Israel after the Holocaust and place themselves directly in harm's way and die in battle? It's because you don't come to Israel because it's safe. Jews don't live in Israel because it's safe. Zionism is not about making Jews safe, although that's the aspiration. Zionism is about making Jews free. Free to argue with one another, free to build families, build communities like the ones that were burned on Shabbat, free to build an economy, free to build an army, free to go to university without being, frightened by Arabs surrounding your dormitories. Free. It was just about Jews being free. Safe, unsafe. The purpose isn't safety. The purpose is freedom. Freedom to be Jews. Freedom to live without having to beg for somebody to protect you. There was a clip that was on Twitter last night. None of us can sleep very well, so it's probably at 2:00 in the morning when I was exhausted with my eyes wide open and looking at my cell phone. And there was, I think it was at NYU, there was a Hamas rally in the center of the campus, and I think it was at Madison, actually. It was the University of Wisconsin. So the Nazis at Madison were screaming, we love murder, or whatever, some words to that effect. And then and I had seen that in one clip, and in the clip that I saw at 2:30 in the morning, there were these young Jewish girls, students, who were begging some university official to protect them, and saying, how can you let this happen in our campus? Why are you letting them call for us to be murdered? And they're crying. And this guy is saying, well, no, this isn't about here. It's we don't take sides. It's about a dispute far away, from what I could understand. And he was completely closed off to them. He couldn't care less about their concerns. He wasn't there for them. He was there for the Nazis. These Jewish girls can go home, go back home, forget about University of Wisconsin, go on and find, maybe go to University of Florida, which apparently is protecting its Jews thanks to It's President Ben Sasse and the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. Maybe they can go there or to another campus that's better for Jews and maneuver in that way. And that's fine. And live your life in America. But again, that is important. For some people, it's the most important thing. But what we're seeing is that the safety of the students at University of Wisconsin and the Jews in New York and the Jews in Chicago and the Jews in London and the Jews in Sydney, the Jews in Paris and the Jews in Johannesburg, Jews in Buenos Aires, Jews throughout the world, is tied up in a shared fate with the Jews of Israel. Every single time that Hamas, that the PLO, Islamic Jihad, whatever they want to call themselves on any, Monday you can think of, or Friday, there is always a rise in attacks against Jews throughout the world. Always. Because from their perspective, the only thing that protects the Jews in the diaspora is Israel. When Israel is considered powerful, they leave the Jews alone. When Israel is considered weak, they attack them. That is the basic truth that we saw this week. Those kibbutzim, some of them, very, very far to the left. Very, very far to the left. Kibbutz Be'eri, which was overrun. Yeah, that's peace now, and you had an officer from Otniel, Jewish community in the South Hebron Hills, and his brother and his nephew, they got up as soon as they heard what was happening. His name is Kalmanzon, and he and his brother organized the defense of their community, and then they got in their car on Shabbat and drove down south to Kibbutz Be'eri, where they saved dozens and dozens of people until one brother was wounded and the other one was killed. They didn't see anything dividing them, and I'm sure that the Jews of Be'eri who were saved by them don't see any distinction between themselves and those who saved them. And the same is true of members of the Brothers in Arms paramilitary shock forces that have been leading the charge against the Netanyahu government and trying to convince like-minded leftists not to serve in the IDF under Netanyahu. They've been responding 100+% to their call-up orders, and they are also engaged in saving people. Yair Golan, the far-left former deputy minister from Meretz, who, is likened religious Jews to Nazis. He put on his uniform as a major general in the IDF and went down south and started saving people's lives as well. So, this is exactly what Gantz was saying. We have a partnership in faith. We have a common fate. And the purpose of Zionism, even when the state of Israel fails, as it did on Saturday, is always the same. It's to save the Jewish people from annihilation by providing us with freedom and self-determination in the land of Israel against all those who want to wipe us out. And we see with what happened on Shabbat that Hamas and its supporters around the world, the PLO, Islamic Jihad, the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and all the rest of it, the slaughter that we saw, the celebration, the bloodbath, the orgiastic bloodbath that we saw, the extraordinarily sick, obscene, impossible to get your head around stories that we've heard of the brutality. They have to drive home this fact. Anybody who stands with Hamas stands for the physical annihilation of Jewish people, wherever they are. And the only way that Jewish people around the world will be safe at SUNY, at universities throughout the Western world, is if Israel is safe. We have a common fate, and Israel is not about safety. It's about securing the existence of the Jewish people here in Israel, the largest Jewish community in the world, thanks to the success of the Zionist ideal, and throughout the world. I don't blame the father for feeling this way. I know a lot of people who have families in the United States have gotten calls, or in Europe have gotten calls from their worried relatives saying, maybe you want to come and stay with us. I know some people whose uncles and aunts have offered to pay for them to leave Israel and come and stay with them. People are worried, justifiably. But there are Hamas protests, Hamas sympathizers threatening Jews everywhere. And the only way that all of us will be safe is after Israel defeats these people here, these monsters here on the ground in Gaza. So why do all Jews need to be Zionists? Because they cannot continue to exist as Jews wherever they want to live without Israel emerging victorious from this horrible war. We move into this week. Tomorrow morning at the synagogue, we're going to read the Torah portion, Bereshit, the first portion of the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created heaven and the earth. And in the great scholar Rashi's interpretation of the first verse of the Bible, he asks the question and answers, why is it that the Torah starts with the book of Genesis, which gives the story of the creation and then the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And he gives the answer. He says, because God wanted to make it clear that the Jewish slaves in Egypt were going home, that the land of Israel belonged to the Jews alone, and that nobody would ever claim that they were interlopers on somebody else's land. And that's why the book of Genesis comes before the book of Exodus, which gives the story of the enslavement of the sons of Jacob in Egypt. Our existence is contingent, our faith is contingent on our control and our sovereignty and our security in the land of Israel. Everything for all Jews is now hanging in the balance. The good news is we are going to win. Shabbat Shalom.